Okay, so welcome to the first video here for the month of June. We are just about 5 months away from the 2020 elections. Obviously, this is going to be a historic election. A number of incredibly competitive and compelling Senate races are also up on the ballot in 2020. The House of Representatives also has a number of very, very hotly contested races, and we have some gubernatorial races that are getting a lot of national attention. So let's get right into it. Whereas we always do, we're going to go all 50 states, west to east. There are going to be a number of states that are going to be very, very swingy. And as we know, you see the number right there, 538, the first to 270 wins the presidency. So this is again Joe Biden as the presumptive Democratic nominee. That is not official yet. Joe Biden against Donald Trump. So let's start down here before we forget, as we sometimes do, with the state of Alaska, a rather reliable Republican stronghold. It's not inconceivable that Democrats could win down here because they've had some success there in the past in statewide races. It's a reliably Republican state, but it's not necessarily as far to the right as the Republican Party in general has shifted. But for now, in a presidential race, that's going to go safely red. And basically, the exact opposite is going to happen in Hawaii. That's going to be a reliably Democratic state. And so, right out here in the parts of the country kind of furthest removed and literally removed from the mainland, the Democrats have the early lead 4-3. So let's go here up into the state of Washington. This is a pretty reliably blue state. Maria Cantwell, Patty Murray, and Jay Inslee are all pretty popular Democrats up here in this part of the country. And this is, an important state for the Democrats. It's a big 12 votes that they pretty much have to keep away from the Republicans because, as we know, the path to 270 for either party is pretty narrow. And so for the Democrats, just keeping control of the West Coast here is going to be very important. Oregon is pretty much the same as Washington, although in Oregon, Republicans have a little bit more of a chance. I'd say in Washington, it's kind of a they basically have no chance at all. Whereas in Oregon, they at least had kind of a pipe dream, but in a presidential election year, the turnout is just going to be way too high. They don't have much of a chance to overcome the vote in Portland. Basically, I think in Oregon, the only kind of success the Republicans could have is maybe getting one Senate seat there at some point, or maybe getting a governor elected there. But as of now, Kate Brown, Ron Wyden, and Jeff Merkley prove that there's a lot of Democratic voters that are still pretty enthusiastic about it there. And let's not forget that Jeff Merkley is up for re-election in November. So that's going to be another important Senate race to keep an eye on. California. Now, obviously, California is one of those states that the Republicans are always going to be thinking about, given that this remains the most populated state in the country and, as a result, carries the most weight on election night with 55 votes. It is the biggest prize in the entire electorate. And the Democrats with Dianne Feinstein, Kamala Harris, they got Gavin Newsom elected to replace outgoing Governor Jerry Brown. So there's not much concern for the Democrats. Or they also flipped something like 7 House seats in the state. The Republicans did manage to get one of them back in a special election, a little bit of a boost for them. And as we know, the Republicans do have a fairly decent presence in California between Kevin McCarthy and Devin Nunes, among others. They had Dana Rohrabacher there for a long time. He lost in the 2018 midterms, but for now, Joe Biden should pretty comfortably take care of California by around 20 points. The state of Idaho, the Democrats have basically just shown no evidence that they can be competitive in this state. The city of Boise has grown enough to where there's at least, they can get a Democratic mayor elected there. And it is possible that sort of in one kind of surprise upset election that the Democrats could win the House seat, one of the 2 House seats rather, that represents the state of Idaho. But as of now, there's just no reason to believe they can actually be competitive in the general election there. Same in the state of Montana. Now, in Montana, what we have seen is that Democrats do have a lot of success in this state for this part of the country. In fact, it is very, very possible that in 2020, the state of Montana could go to Donald Trump by at least 15 points and the Democrats could actually come away with both Senate seats and the governorship, which is incredible to think about. There's kind of an environmental consciousness up here. There are also a lot of wealthy California types that own second homes in the state of Montana. But right now, Steve Bullock, as somebody who filed for the senatorial race there just minutes before the deadline, has given the Democrats a real boost in their chances for the Senate. He is taking on longtime incumbent Steve Daines, and then the lieutenant governor is also going up against Greg Gianforte, the House member who represents the entire state in its lone congressional district. And as a result, with given Greg Gianforte's checkered past, the Democrats have a good chance of winning the governorship and retaining it as Steve Bullock moves on to a potential Senate bid. Wyoming, nothing to discuss here. It's a pretty reliable Republican state. It's not really competitive at this point, and probably still the most reliably red state in the entire country. Let's go over here to Nevada. Nevada has shifted pretty far to the left in recent years. Dean Heller, a Republican senator, lost his reelection bid in 2018 to Jackie Rosen, the female senator. That was a big pickup for the Democrats because they lost 4 Senate seats between Bill Nelson down here in Florida, Joe Donnelly in Indiana, Claire McCaskill in Missouri, and Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota. They did have some good results defensively with Sherrod Brown winning re-election and Debbie Stabenow winning re-election, Tammy Baldwin winning re-election, Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, among others. And so in Nevada, that sort of recovery of sorts began out there when Jackie Rosen was able to unseat the incumbent Dean Heller. Furthermore, this was a state that the Democrats also flipped the governorship, Steve Sisolak winning the governorship race here. So now the Democrats have both Senate seats and the governorship. And right now, this is the kind of state that does seem to respond to national popularity from a president. And as a result, that's going to make Nevada stay blue. The Democrats are in pretty strong position there in Nevada. So the West Coast, they take the 4 states of California, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington, the Republicans hanging on to Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. So no surprises so far. Both sides kind of holding their own so far. Democrats with 84, Republicans with 13. The state of Utah has shown some glimmers of hope, if you will, for the Democratic Party. Ben McAdams defeated Mia Love in the 2018 midterms. A bit of a surprise there. Very, very, very close race. And the Salt Lake City area, kind of right here in the middle of the state, is really the only area of the state that Democrats have any, chance of winning in. And there was a poll recently that had Donald Trump only ahead in the state by just 3 points, which is incredibly concerning for the Republicans. Not that he's necessarily going to lose the state, or even that it would end up, even if lightning struck and he actually did lose the state, that it would throw off the rest of the map too poorly for them, because as we know, these elections really come down to just 6 or 7 states. But between Mia Love losing to Ben McAdams and the poll having Trump narrowly ahead, that gives them cause to pause about where he really does stand nationally. And so things like that, combined with his low approval numbers and Joe Biden winning dozens of consecutive general election generic polls where it's just the 2 of them facing off, gives Republicans a little bit of nerves. One reason in the state of Utah could be that since Mitt Romney was elected easily to the Senate here, Romney has been one of the only outspoken critics of Donald Trump in the Republican Party, and certainly in the Senate. So that could, and Mitt Romney is pretty well liked in the state of Utah. So that could be a reason why we're seeing a bit of a shift, maybe just ever so, not even necessarily to the left, but just to the middle of sorts. And so I think the Romney factor is having a little bit of an effect in Utah, but that is not really going to make the Republicans sweat this state in particular. Again, there are reasons for them to fear what's going on nationally, but not in Utah. All right, now here is the first big state of the evening, Arizona. This is a state that only in a couple of years has seen a dramatic shift to the left. This has happened incredibly quickly. And it wasn't that long ago that with John McCain there, among, John Kyle, longtime senator there, that this was a state that the Democrats could get a House seat or two in, might be competitive in one, gubernatorial race, but it's a Republican state. And from 2018 on, the state of Arizona has really, really been an extremely exciting development for the Democratic Party, as this is going to become one of the sort of tilt factor states. This is kind of a tipping point state right here this early on. And again, on election night, because this is on the West Coast, you might see this, the election itself could come down to the state of Arizona, and polls, will take a while to close and all that. So, but let's get into it. In Arizona, the first sign was in 2018 when Kyrsten Sinema defeated Martha McSally, who was appointed to fill that seat that was vacated. Now, John Kyle actually was sort of appointed as the caretaker for that seat, but now, McSally is the current senator, the other senator, of course, from that state, as the governor appointed her to fill the empty seat. And after Kyrsten Sinema ended up winning against Martha McSally to replace outgoing Senator John Kyle. So the governor actually appointed two different senators at the same time. It was a little hard to keep straight. But Kyrsten Sinema won that race in 2018. It was close. It wasn't decided until a little bit after the election night itself, but she did win. Since then, Joe Biden has been polling very favorably down here in Arizona. Maricopa County, kind of in the southeast portion of the state where Phoenix is, has traditionally been a rather conservative area, especially for an urban city. And that is changing quickly. The Democrats are seeing a lot of positive momentum here, and further complicating things for the Republicans is there is a Senate race down here that is just killing the Republicans. Mark Kelly, the husband of Gabrielle Giffords, a former astronaut, is considerably ahead of Martha McSally. There have been multiple polls that have Kelly with a double-digit lead over Martha McSally. So the Democrats clearly have a lot of enthusiasm down here. They have great candidates down here, and as a result, it's going to be extremely hard, I think, for the Republicans to win this state. And remember, they weren't really facing these problems yet in 2016, where they still had both senators and the governor, all that, and yet Donald Trump still only beat Hillary Clinton, who was not a very liked candidate, really on either side for that matter, by only 4 points. Okay, it was 52-48. And so with all that in mind, Arizona's going blue. And that is a crucial flip for the Democrats, because this, as we know, Hillary Clinton came up 38 votes short in 2016, and there's 11 of them right there. Assuming she can hold on to some of the other kind of swingy Democratic states, there aren't that many of them, but there are a couple that we'll outline later. This is a crucial win for Joe Biden, and an absolutely devastating blow to the Trump camp. Moving on, Colorado. Now, Colorado kind of remains a state that the Republicans can be competitive in, can have a presence in. Cory Gardner, as we know, was elected to the Senate in 2014, but this is, as ahead as Mark Kelly is down in Arizona, John Hickenlooper is further ahead in Colorado. In fact, John Hickenlooper is so far ahead that the Democrats aren't even spending that much money on this race. He was probably the best possible candidate that the Democrats could have had to unseat Cory Gardner. He actually did, as we know, have a very short, failed run for the presidency. He's a rather conservative Democrat, pretty moderate guy. Was the governor of Colorado for a long time, but that does not mean that just because there is a Republican senator there currently, Republicans can get around 44% or so of the vote in Colorado, and they had the conservative governor, that Colorado is not shifting leftward either, because Michael Bennet is an extremely liked senator and a very reliable Democratic vote, even on issues that range pretty far to the left. Furthermore, Jared Polis, who became the new governor in the state of Colorado, is an openly gay governor, and if memory serves, he's the first openly gay governor in the state of Colorado. So between that, with Hickenlooper's very positive favorability numbers, with Cory Gardner, who's not a very well-known Republican nationally, it wasn't received well when he voted to confirm Judge Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. All that, along with Hickenlooper's little push, is going to help secure Colorado for the Democrats. So they're the first over the century mark, 104-19. And again, Arizona is forcing Donald Trump to make up some ground elsewhere. Now in New Mexico, this is sort of a misnomer as kind of like being considered one of the most reliably blue states. That's a little bit misleading. Republicans do have quite a presence here. The Democrats flipped a House district here that basically, if you can just follow the mouse here, it goes basically from here, right in the middle of the state, across the initials there, NM, all the way down through the southern portion. So like this little half of the state is one district, and the Democrats were able to flip that district in 2018. That was one of the crucial targets that they had in their bid to take the House of Representatives back into their power, and they did just that. They also, in the midterms, were able to flip this governorship here. Michelle Grisham won her race, and this was one of the 7 states that flipped their governor from Republican to Democrat. I believe Martin Heinrich is up for re-election, and either in 2020 or 2022, it's one of those. But this, unless something bizarre happens and Democratic turnout is low, even though Republicans are better served and are in a better position in New Mexico than they're given credit for, the Democrats will hang on to this, and Joe Biden picks up another 5 votes there. Now we're starting to get into a big red wall. The state of North Dakota, as we know, Heidi Heitkamp, Kent Conrad, the Democrats have been able to get people elected here in the past, and I would expect Joe Biden to get over the 40% mark. But in a general election, North Dakota is going to go red. Now, South Dakota, oddly enough, actually does seem to go a little bit further to the left than even North Dakota does. Democrats have had senators here in the past. The governor race there, they were able to get 47% of the vote in South Dakota, which is nothing to sneeze at. But again, in a general election, turnout just a little bit higher. And even though turnout does, better turnout does favor the Democrats, these states kind of have an identity. South Dakota is going to remain red. Nebraska is not really the same as the Dakotas. Nebraska is just pretty ruby red. Deb Fischer, Ben Sasse. There's not really much of a reason to believe the Democrats have a chance here. Now, there is the potential that this could be one of the split decisions, because Nebraska is one of 2 states, along with Maine, that can split their vote. There are 5 districts, or 4 districts rather, in the state of Nebraska. 3 districts. I'm getting this mixed up. 3 districts in the state of Nebraska. Democrats can win one of them over here, sort of in the Lincoln area. But I think, again, with higher turnout, Nebraska is probably just going to go 5 for 5 in favor of Joe Biden. It's possible that, some really motivated voters in Lincoln, Omaha area down here in the southeast could push one of these votes into the Democratic camp. But I imagine that right now, unless we have some polling data that confirms otherwise, I think Nebraska as a whole is going to stay with the Republicans. Now, Kansas has shown some positive signs for Democrats recently. They shocked the world when they managed to win the governorship here. Laura Kelly, the woman, the female Democratic candidate, won her election bid over Chris Kobach, who's a notably staunch Trump ally. Kobach is actually again running for the Senate race here that's being vacated by outgoing Senator Pat Roberts. And if he is able to win the primary, which is not for another few months, that would actually give Democrats a little bit of a lift, because unless he is the nominee for the Senate seat here, the Democrats are not really going to have much of a chance. If he is, then Democrats might have a chance to actually shock the world again and pick up this Senate seat, but that's unlikely. And in a presidential year, it's just not they're not ready to flip from red to blue. So I think this is going to be Still a pretty comfortably red result for the Republicans. Oklahoma, I mean, there's just no reason to believe Oklahoma's not going red. Democrats have about one House seat right there in the Oklahoma City area that the Republicans are actively targeting as a potential flip. So there's basically no reason to believe that Oklahoma is going to go blue in the presidential election. And so, as always, the Republicans are able to pick up these 5 states, and they're making up some ground 109 to 43. Now, in Texas, the second biggest state in the country, Republicans are beginning to see a little bit of worrying signs in the state. Beto O'Rourke, the 3-term congressman way out here in El Paso, had an incredibly effective Senate campaign, came up just short against Ted Cruz, came up a little less than 2 points short, about 215,000 votes short of incumbent Ted Cruz. Republicans in the presidential elections are pretty easily able to win the state of Texas. But even in the, Obama-McCain years, 56-44 was the margin then. Mitt Romney won it by a similar margin. Lupe Valdez, who was the Democratic nominee for governor, she lost to Greg Abbott. She won 43% of the vote in Texas. Now, that's not close, but Lupe Valdez was not a very well-known figure. She wasn't exactly, the most liked candidate, the most well-known candidate. She certainly didn't have the attraction that Beto O'Rourke has, wasn't generating nearly as much enthusiasm, and she still captured 43%, which is a respectable number. And so the Republicans are going to have to spend some money here. And remember, earlier on, about a month or so ago, there was even a poll that had Joe Biden 1 point ahead of Donald Trump in the state of Texas. And as we know, if the Democrats win the state of Texas in a general election, this election is over. But as of now, it's just too early. I think we're still not quite there yet for the Democrats taking the state of Texas in a general election. I imagine Donald Trump will take this state in a rather, sort of too close for comfort kind of thing, around 54-46, maybe even a little tighter than that. But the Democrats are forcing the Republican Party to spend money in this state, something they didn't have to do for a very long time. So now in the state of Minnesota, this is another big one. Donald Trump lost the state of Minnesota in 2016 by only 1 point. Okay, and that was sort of overlooked by the shocking results of him winning in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and in Florida and hanging on in North Carolina. But in the state of Minnesota, he came within 1 point of defeating Hillary Clinton. Now, in one way, that is a good sign for Democrats because Hillary Clinton, as we know, was pretty unpopular and still managed to win the state. And furthermore, the Democrats had an absolute field day in the 2018 midterms in this state. There were 3 statewide races, and they won all of them. There were both Senate seats were up, and the governorship was up. Amy Klobuchar easily won re-election in the state of Minnesota. Very popular senator, won a lot of reliably red counties. Tina Smith, the first-time senator, was elected to the seat after the seat was vacated by resigning Senator Al Franken. Tina Smith was able to win that Senate seat. And then Tim Walz, the governor who's in the news a lot right now after the protests going on in Minneapolis, was also able to win. So this would be, I think, a troubling sign for Democrats in the event that they didn't have as much success as they did in the 2018 midterms. But again, they went 3 for 3. None of the 3 races were particularly close either. Now, the Republicans, we did see a report that said that the Trump campaign believes they have a chance here. And if they were to win the state of Minnesota, this is going to mess a lot of different things up and narrow the path to 270 for Joe Biden. But with Arizona going in his camp, this is a trade-off they can more or less afford to make, the Democrats, that is. But as of now, unless we see some polling that shows Donald Trump is really neck and neck with Joe Biden or is ahead of him, I think this is going to stay blue, okay? And so I think a best-case scenario for the Republicans would be even just being able to see a poll where they're tied with Biden or very close to Biden, because even on their best day in Minnesota, it's going to be airtight. and I don't think it's going to be just enough. If they win, it'll be by a couple thousand votes. I think a more liked candidate, Tina Smith, will again be on the ballot in 2020. I think it's going to stay blue. And so now the Democrats kind of have the upper hand so far as they've made the first flip of the night, flipping a crucial 11 votes into their column. Now in the state of Iowa, pretty fascinating state. This is one of the more elastic states in the country. There was a pretty hotly contested governor race here in 2018. Kim Reynolds, the Republican, was able to defeat a strong challenge from Fred Hubbell, the Democratic candidate for governor here. It was about 53-47. Chuck Grassley, as we know, was pretty much in the national spotlight as the chairman of the committee that was basically in charge of confirming Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. He is very interesting in this scenario because in 2022, he will be up for re-election, and by then he will be, I believe, 87 years old. So it's possible that he could just leave that seat open and retire. Joni Ernst, meanwhile, a rather unpopular senator, is up for re-election in the state. Barack Obama did manage to win the state back in 2008, and Democrats, oddly enough, actually there are 4 House districts in the state of Iowa. Democrats have 3 of them, and the one that they don't, up here in the northwest portion of the state, is actually run by Steve King, who is infamously been disliked by both parties. So the Republican Party themselves have actually tried to push him out of the party altogether. And so the Democrats, pretty much every election cycle, try to throw a bunch of money into this seat and can never quite seem to get him outvoted, rather. But right now, I think, again, unless we see some polling that suggests otherwise, Iowa is still kind of a lean to the right, and I'm going to give those 6 votes to Trump. And that's a key retention because, right now he's, down a little bit after losing Arizona, so he needs to he needs to keep the states that are a little wobbly, and Iowa is one of them. Now in Missouri, we did see Claire McCaskill. She was able to get, herself elected and reelected in the state of Missouri. She did lose, though, in 2018. Wasn't that close to Josh Hawley, a noted Trump fan. Now, Mike Parson recently was in a poll that had him up by 8 points. And in a similar poll that was conducted at the same time, Donald Trump was only ahead by 4 points. Okay, so that's another sign that there might be some kind of national unfavorability towards Trump. But right now, I don't quite see the evidence to suggest that Trump is going to lose. Other than St. Louis, it's just difficult to, and some votes that kind of seep in from the Illinois area. It's a little difficult to see a path for the Democrats to win this seat. It could be closer than expected, with high turnout. But as of now, this is going to stay red, and that's a big 10 votes for Donald Trump. Again, these 2 states are important for him because they can be it's possible for Democrats to win. But they kind of have that identity that we have spoken of with some of these other states. Now in Arkansas is pretty much just a no-brainer at this point. John Boozman, Tom Cotton, Asa Hutchinson, pretty far to the right. No evidence to suggest the Democrats have virtually any chance here. So Arkansas will go to the Republicans. Louisiana, as we know, does have a Democratic governor, John Bel Edwards. Bill Cassidy is up for re-election in 2020. It's hard to see how that, hard to justify the Democrats throwing that much money into that race, considering they have Senate races that they're actively pushing for in Montana, Arizona, Colorado, potentially in Kansas, definitely in Iowa, Georgia, North Carolina, and Maine, and then as well as retaining one in Michigan and New Hampshire. On top of the ones that they already want to retain that are a little bit safer. So Louisiana, I don't think the Democrats are going to spend much money here. They'll get a lot of votes out of here in New Orleans, some in Baton Rouge, some in Shreveport, but for now, no evidence to suggest the Republicans are in any danger of losing Louisiana. Now in Mississippi, the Democrats do a little bit better than the sort of ethos of the state would suggest. They get a lot of votes here, kind of in the Midwest portion of the state. Mike Espy is running again against Cindy Hyde-Smith, who was able to defeat him in that special election. I believe 54-46 was the final tally. A pretty respectable showing by Mike Espy, especially after Hyde-Smith found herself in some hot water. after some controversial comments she made. Again, just no evidence to suggest Mississippi is in any danger of flipping, so that's 6 votes to Donald Trump. Alabama, as we know, was the site of one of the most shocking senatorial election results in the last 30 years of U.S. politics, really, when Doug Jones was able to defeat Roy Moore and get elected to the Senate from the state of Alabama. Now, he is easily the most vulnerable Democrat in the Senate and probably the most vulnerable senator altogether, even more than Colorado's Cory Gardner. Now, while he is fundraising pretty well so far, it is extremely unlikely that he is able to win this race. Tommy Tuberville, as well as even potentially Roy Moore again. Now, if Roy Moore were to actually win the primary, then it might be worth revisiting, especially as Doug Jones continues to raise a lot of money and do so efficiently. But for now, that is not going to be enough to tilt this nationally. Donald Trump wins the state of Alabama. So now he has the lead, 126 to 119. In the state of Georgia, a state that has become much more competitive in recent years, and this, with that 16 votes right there, could sort of become its own Arizona, in that it's sort of a sudden battleground state that the Republicans need to spend a lot of money in, and they do already. Brian Kemp, somewhat controversially, did win a narrow race. He was very, very, very tough. It was a tough competition, that is, that he was given from Stacey Abrams. Won that race 52 to 48. Kemp is not very popular so far in the state of Georgia. The Atlanta area, kind of up here in the western portion of the state, the northwestern portion of the state, is extremely left-leaning. And so right now there are also 2 Senate races. Both seats are up in the state of Georgia. David Perdue, the incumbent, is running for re-election in his seat. And Kelly Loeffler, who replaced Johnny Isakson, is in a lot of hot water herself after after being accused of insider trading. Now, the Democrats have not done a very good job of assembling particularly attractive candidates for either one of those seats. As of now, it happens to be Joe Lieberman's son. His first name is escaping me, and then Jon Ossoff, who ran part of the most expensive House race in the history of the country, and came up a little bit short to Karen Handel, who's running for the 3rd time for that same seat against Gina Haspel. And so right now, because I don't think the Democrats are engendering that much enthusiasm in the Georgia area with their Senate candidates, I think it's going to stay red, which is a big hold for the Republicans. But as we know right now, even though with the map, kind of shaking itself out the way it did in 2016, they know that they're in some hot water, given that they're underwater in some of the polls in a couple of these other Midwestern states, and they're already 11 down from what they were in 2016 with Arizona. Now in Florida, this is one of the biggest ones right here, the 3rd biggest, tied for the 3rd biggest state in the United States. Trump did win the state by about 1 point. Was very close. The 2018 midterms featured 2 statewide races that the Democrats were extremely passionate about and were pursuing as hard as they possibly can, and came up just short in both of them. Andrew Gillum, a very progressive Democrat, the mayor of Tallahassee, ran for the governorship and lost very narrowly to Ron DeSantis. And then Bill Nelson, the longtime incumbent Democratic senator, lost by just 10,000 votes to former Governor Rick Scott. So the Democrats had a couple of pretty devastating blows in the state. They were able to flip 2 House seats down here in South Florida in the Miami area. Monroe County, which represents the Florida Keys, as well as Key Largo, was flipped from Republican to Democrat, although that is one of the most contested districts in the entire country. It is so down the middle, it's incredible. And then in the Miami area, Donna Shalala, the former member of the Bill Clinton administration, former president of the University of Miami, was also able to flip that seat. So they got the 2 House seats that they specifically targeted, and they have a number of others up in the Orlando area, the Tampa area, Tallahassee, a little bit of a presence in Jacksonville as well. So there are a couple reasons for the Democrats to be encouraged by the state of things in Florida. First of all, they had some good polling. The most recent poll wasn't very convincing at all, but if anything, it was a good thing for the Democrats. It had Joe Biden leading by 1 point in Florida. Now, that's obviously incredibly tenuous, and it, doesn't exactly, engender very much confidence for the Democrats in that they're only up by 1 point. But again, it is a lead, and it's the same effect would be had if Donald Trump was ahead by 1 point. Only a few more voters in that poll indicated they wanted to vote for Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden, who was on the ticket both times in 2012 and in 2008, he and Barack Obama managed to carry this state both times. So it is possible that Joe Biden is just that much more popular. So the question is a little bit more popularity, the passage of Amendment 4, which restored over 1 million felons' voting rights, even though that's been tinkered a little bit by the Florida state legislature, are those 2 things enough? Make it 3 things with some better polling numbers and a couple of flipped House districts. Is that going to be enough to get about 100,000 or so more votes into Joe Biden's camp? It's hard to convince yourself that 100,000 more could happen. Furthermore, for Donald Trump, though, that's making this a harder state for him to win than it may have been in 2016, is that he is losing support, and quickly, among voters that are 65 and older. And as we know, Florida is full of voters that are 65 and older. So I think this could be a state in which this is an absolute nail-biter. I think this could be a scenario where we see it decided by less than 15,000 votes. But right now, I'm going to pick Donald Trump to hold on to the state of Florida, which by an absolute razor-thin margin, probably along the lines of 50.2 to 49.8. Which, if memory serves, would even call for a mandatory recount in the state of Florida. We all know how recounts usually are received in the state of Florida. But as of now, I'm giving Florida to Donald Trump, and that's a crushing blow to Joe Biden and a huge boost for the GOP, because if the Democrats were able to flip the state of Florida and the state of Arizona and win every other state that they did in 2016, they would win the presidency. Only on that by itself. So retaining Florida, a big, big win for Donald Trump and the Republicans. The state of Tennessee has shifted pretty far to the right. Phil Bredesen, who's one of the most established and well-known Democrats, couldn't really even get close to winning that Senate seat against Marsha Blackburn. So I'm giving that one to the Republicans. In the state of South Carolina, Jamie Harrison is doing a pretty good job fundraising against Lindsey Graham. Jamie Harrison's a very well-known figure in South Carolina politics, former chair of the Democratic Party there in South Carolina. Jim Clyburn, of course, has also been a long-term fixture in the state. Lindsey Graham, because of a lot of sort of controversial moves he's had, combined with Jamie Harrison running an effective campaign with a lot of effective ads and a lot of good advertising, or rather a lot of good fundraising that we've seen so far, probably makes this a little more comfortable, or rather a little too contentious for the Republicans to be pleased with. But as of now, it's going to stay in their favor, probably around 54-46, which was about the margin of victory for Henry McMaster in the gubernatorial election there in 2018. Now, this is a crucial state here, the state of North Carolina. Donald Trump won the state. This is a big 15 votes right here. Right now, most of the polling suggests that Joe Biden is just narrowly ahead in the state. But there is also a couple of reasons to believe that the Democrats are in a pretty good position here in the state. That's because, first of all, Roy Cooper, who's one of the most popular governors in the country, is up for re-election. And so you might have some down-ballot action that's happening and some extended turnout Roy Cooper is widely expected to win re-election against Dan Forest, the GOP challenger. Cooper winning by easily at least 15 points in most of the polling that we've seen so far. Furthermore, this is a very hotly contested Senate race. Cal Cunningham, the Democrat, against unpopular incumbent, first-time incumbent Thom Tillis. Some of the polling has Cal Cunningham ahead. One poll even had him 7 points ahead of Thom Tillis, but more recent polling has had Tillis ahead by as much as 2 points. So this is going to be a dead heat race in the Senate. But the Democrats are also in a pretty good position to flip at least 2 House districts in the state of North Carolina. So we're seeing a little bit of a shift from the right to the left, maybe a little bit towards the middle, if you will, in the state of North Carolina. And you have a state that does seem to respond rather well to the national popularity of the candidates, similarly to Nevada, as we mentioned earlier. So right now, I am actually going to give North Carolina to Joe Biden. And right there is a huge flip for him, as he's now made up 26 votes that the Democrats, of the 38 that the Democrats were short in 2016. So that's the second flip of the night for either party. Arizona going blue and North Carolina going blue. Again, Roy Cooper being on the ballot, Cal Cunningham being on the ballot, and a couple of House districts that are showing positive signs for the Democrats, I think is going to push a much more respected, especially in the South, candidate like Joe Biden. Now in the state of Virginia, a state that Republicans have long kind of tried to push back to the right unsuccessfully. Part of it has been because they've had some trouble nominating candidates that can generate support among some independents. Although the problem also in Virginia for Republicans, and to a lesser extent for Democrats, is that there just aren't that many known independents in the state. It's mostly just Democrats from suburban D.C. and some of the other urban areas in Virginia, and then Republicans that are a lot further to the right in some of the rural areas. And far less populated areas of Virginia. So it's a little bit inelastic in that way, which is good for the Democrats. But the Republicans, of course, nominating Scott Wagner for the Senate last time around, which went absolutely nowhere fast for them. Even with a better candidate to potentially challenge Mark Warner, highly unlikely they get too much traction. They'll probably get their usual 44-45%. But as of now, Joe Biden is still in pretty good shape in the state of Virginia. Big retention for him. In the state of West Virginia, it's pretty much the opposite. Moderate Democrats can win in the state of West Virginia, as we've seen from Joe Manchin, even though he is about as far to the right as a Democrat can go. He makes John Hickenlooper of Colorado appear more like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Of course, Jim Justice, the governor here, famously, made a big party flip when he went from the Democrats to the Republicans. Shelley Moore Capito is up for re-election. There are no signs to suggest that she is in any kind of trouble, and Donald Trump will be just fine in the state. So that's 5 votes for him. In the state of Kentucky, kind of an interesting one here. Democrats like to kind of point to Kentucky as sort of their next big move. Mitch McConnell is up for re-election. The second most unpopular senator in the country. However, as we know, he is a fundraising magician. And even as he is facing a rather tough challenge from Amy McGrath, who Chuck Schumer personally recruited to try to unseat Mitch McConnell. Just no real reason to believe that this is going to be a problem. Of course, the Democrats did gain some steam here when they won the governorship here. Andy Beshear won against Matt Bevin, but Matt Bevin, as we all know, had, let's just say, some problems he was dealing with at the time of the race. And even then, Andy Beshear barely was able to squeak this one out. So nationally, not much of a problem in the general election. Mitch McConnell is probably going to have to do some spending here or rather the Republicans are going to have to spend quite a bit on Mitch McConnell, some more than they would like. And this might be a state to keep an eye on in the future, but for now, Kentucky's pretty safe for the Republicans. State of Illinois, of course, Mark Kirk has, they did get themselves a senator elected here, but he was pretty swiftly defeated by Tammy Duckworth back in 2016. That was one of two gains in the Senate the Democrats made that year between Duckworth and then up here, Maggie Hassan winning her race. So, right now there's no reason to really believe, with J.B. Pritzker in there, with Dick Durbin, who's up for re-election, very popular Democratic senator, no reason to believe that the Democrats are in any kind of danger of losing. That's another big 20 votes there. 167 to 204 is our current tally. State of Indiana, again, Joe Donnelly was part of the picture for the Democratic Party in the Senate. He did lose, and pretty convincingly, in 2018, the 2018 midterms. Barack Obama did win the state of Indiana back in 2008, but with Mike Pence on the ballot, no reason to believe this is going to the left, rather. Now, Ohio. Ohio, as we know, has been one of those states that some of these presidential elections can kind of come down to. That basically was what happened in 2004 between John Kerry and George Bush. Hillary Clinton only won 43% of the vote in the state of Ohio, which is pretty disappointing for the Democrats. After Obama won the state both times, the second time was very close, but still won it purely on the strength of the urban areas of Cleveland, Akron, Columbus, Dayton, Cincinnati. But Donald Trump won it very convincingly. Now, it's definitely going to be a little bit of a different race this time, because as we've seen, when Hillary Clinton is not the one being considered, it does tend to shift a little bit further to the left. Sherrod Brown was up for re-election. That was a target for the Republicans. Sherrod Brown won. Mike DeWine, the recently elected governor there, had a tough test from Richard Cordray. And so, those were both pretty close races. So I would expect Donald Trump to carry this state of Ohio, but by a much thinner margin. I'm thinking about 52-48, and this could be another target as some of the demographic shifts, continue to shift a little bit. In bad news for Democrats, the city of Cincinnati is kind of dying in a lot of ways. As we know, Democrats need urban areas to grow for them to get an advantage in a state like Ohio, but they should be eventually able to flip this back. But for now, this is going to stay with the Republicans. State of Maryland, as we know, Larry Hogan, Republican governor, has been extremely popular in the state, but nothing is really too concerning right now. Baltimore, one of the most liberal areas of the entire country, that goes blue. So right now, the Republicans have a 56-vote lead, 233 to 177. As you can probably tell by now, we're saving some of these swing states for last. Delaware, Joe Biden's home state, we don't even really need to discuss that. A little more Republican, if you will, than people realize. Republicans can get 40% of the vote here. There are 3 counties in Delaware. Republicans usually do win 2 of them, but not with Joe Biden on the ballot. That's going to be one of the easiest states to go blue. New Jersey, definitely not as deep blue as New York is. But right now, no evidence to suggest Joe Biden is in any kind of trouble. If Hillary Clinton was able to win it pretty comfortably, then Joe Biden will be just fine. Washington, D.C., the most liberal area in the country. There's probably not even a conservative area of the country that is as liberal as Washington, D.C. is. So there's another 3 for Joe Biden. The state of Connecticut, we've seen a lot of wealthier conservative types move to the state of Connecticut in recent years, and it was why they actually came shockingly close to winning the governorship there back in 2018. Ned Lamont barely won that race in 2018, which was a little bit concerning for the Democrats because they never really would have expected a state like Connecticut to show any kind of signs of potentially teetering. But for now, again, in a general, no evidence to suggest Joe Biden is in trouble. Rhode Island, basically the same thing, very reliably blue place. Jack Reed the Democratic senator, is up for re-election, one to at least keep somewhat of an eye on for now. New York, Donald Trump's former home state. New York is about as blue as it gets right now. There is a House race over here. The Republican Chris Collins, who has moved on, kind of a troubled, outspoken Republican congressman, loudly in support of Trump. He has moved on. There's a special election there. Democrats kind of are trying to suggest that they might have a little bit of a chance there, but as of now, they probably don't. But right now, no reason to believe that the Republicans have any chance of winning the state of New York. So now the Democrats have the lead again, 237 to 233. They're only 33 votes away. The Republicans are 37 votes away. The state of Vermont, very reliably blue. That's 3 for the Democrats. State of Massachusetts, the Republicans recently have had a senator been elected there. They do have a Republican governor currently, as does Vermont, by the way. Phil Scott, who is up for re-election. Larry Hogan, or rather Charlie Baker, is the governor of Massachusetts. Very, very moderate Republican. Elizabeth Warren is rumored to be involved in the discussions for Joe Biden's potential vice presidential pick. But as of now, no reason to believe that's going to go red. So there's another 11 votes for Joe Biden. He's beginning to close in, 251. He's only 19 votes away. Again, 15 coming from North Carolina, 11 from Arizona. Donald Trump has yet to flip one state from blue to red. New Hampshire. New Hampshire was the tightest race in the 2016 election. Hillary Clinton won it by 0.2 of a point. Which is shockingly close, especially for this part of the country. It does have a Republican governor, Chris Sununu, who is up for re-election. Vermont and New Hampshire, they have 2-year terms on their governorships. But again, Hillary Clinton was able to squeak it out. Jan Shaheen, who's had a pretty steady lead so far, is up for re-election. That, I think, her being on the ballot combined with, again, Joe Biden just being a little more popular, that's a big 4 votes that he's going to retain right there. And so now Donald Trump's path to victory is starting to become pretty thin. Okay, he needs 37 votes, and there's only 50 votes left between Maine, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Okay, there are 50 votes left, and he needs 37 of them. There are 50 votes left, and Joe Biden only needs 15 of them. So, and there are 2 states of which that if he wins, it's over. So let's go to the state of Maine. Donald Trump won one of the votes here. Again, this, as we mentioned a while back, Nebraska is one of the 2 states that splits their vote, Maine being the other. Maine, I don't think is going to have that happen this time. Susan Collins is up for re-election and is incredibly unfavorable. Sarah Gideon is beating her to a pulp in the polls right now. And so unless things change rapidly, this is going to go blue. All 4 votes of it are going to go blue. And now Joe Biden didn't even really need to win this state, but Donald Trump will basically take any vote he can get now. So unless the only state that Joe Biden wins is the state of Wisconsin, of the remaining 3, Donald Trump is toast. So let's start with the state of Wisconsin. This was one of the most shocking results in recent political history, was when Donald Trump was able to win the state of Wisconsin. It is probably the most contested state in the country. It is right down the middle, narrow margins. Now, Scott Walker, who's a pretty nationally known Republican, pretty conservative Republican, lost his re-election bid to the Democrat Tony Evers. That was a big deal for the Democrats, being able to win that race. Tammy Baldwin, who's an openly gay senator, also won her re-election, and comfortably. So those 2 things also combined with the recent Supreme Court victory. The voters elect their Supreme Court justices in Wisconsin, and the Democrats were able to win flip a seat from red to blue on the state's Supreme Court, even though the Republicans still had the advantage on the court. That was a big deal for the Democrats and a sign of things potentially changing. And so that they, originally had their convention planned for Milwaukee. Right now, those things in mind, I'm giving this to the Democrats. So now Donald Trump, there are only 36 votes left, and he's 37 votes behind. And Joe Biden is only 1 vote away from winning. So now the only best case scenario for Donald Trump is a statistical tie, which is possible. Now, the state of Michigan was another state that had 2 statewide races in the 2018 midterms, both of them won by the Democrats. Gretchen Whitmer was able to unseat Bill Schuette, the incumbent Republican governor. Also, Debbie Stabenow was able to defeat Republican John James for the Senate race. Now, Gary Peters is facing a tough test also against John James, and the Republicans believe they have a chance in this state, in that Senate race with John James, because there is obviously some racial tension going on after what we saw in Minnesota. And so there is this belief that African-American voters in suburban Detroit and elsewhere might become a little disenfranchised with voting for another older white incumbent like Gary Peters, and instead might defect towards John James. But again, no evidence yet to suggest that even that is going to happen, as so far Gary Peters has jumped out to an early comfortable lead over John James. And so far, some of the polling, including some polling that just came out today, June the 1st, has Donald Trump considerably behind Joe Biden. So again, 2 statewide races went the Democrats' way. I think you're going to see more turnout. This was the closest result of these 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And as a result, boom, Joe Biden wins the state of Michigan. And there's the result he needed, 285. He has won the presidency. He's flipped 4 states, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, and North Carolina, while also retaining the state of Minnesota and the state of New Hampshire, and winning all 4 votes in the state of Maine, and not having any potential upset occur in the state of Virginia and Colorado and New Mexico. Last state we're going to get to here is the state of Pennsylvania. This was kind of the icing on the cake for Donald Trump in 2016. There was notably some lower turnout in the Philadelphia area. He also was able to carry Erie, Pennsylvania, up here in the Northwest. Pittsburgh, as we know, is a little bit less pronounced of a liberal area than the area of Philadelphia. But right now, this was for the third time was a charm for the Democrats, and all 3 of these states that basically won Donald Trump the election. There were 2 statewide races in the 2018 midterms, and the Democrats won both of them. So in these 3 states, they went 6 for 6 in the midterms. Also 3 for 3 in Minnesota, as we mentioned earlier. So Tom Wolf, the governor, won re-election. Bob Casey, the Democrat, also was able to win re-election. So those 2 things, I think, are going to suggest that this is a state the Democrats feel pretty comfortable with a little bit better candidate and maybe some better turnout. So right now, I'm also going to give Pennsylvania to Joe Biden, the state that he was born in, as we all remember, Scranton Joe, as he was called. So that is the final, 305 to 233. This is almost an identical flip of what we saw happen in 2016 when Donald Trump won 306 to 232, with that 1 extra vote coming in that district in Maine. So that is the final tally, 305 to 233. Joe Biden wins, again, after flipping the states of Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. That in total compromising a total of 72 votes that he flipped from the Republicans to the Democrats. So be sure to hit that like button and subscribe, and stay tuned for our next video. Thanks, guys.